The stars stretched endlessly across the black canvas of space. In the distance, streaks of light marked the movement of ships, some small and agile, others massive, carrying the weight of entire civilizations in their hulls. Commander Varen Kale stood on the observation deck of the flagship Elindra, his 4 eyes scanning the horizon. His species, the Varen, were known for their patience and intellect, but patience alone could not erase the knot of anxiety forming in his chest. The Coalition had called upon all its members to prepare for the coming storm. The Ulthrax, a cruel and powerful species, were moving across the border systems. Their reputation was terrifying. They destroyed every world they touched, leaving nothing behind but silence. Many in the Coalition had already lost entire fleets, entire cities, entire planets. The Varen, despite their wisdom, could not ignore the stories that had reached them. Worlds burned in hours, civilizations enslaved or wiped out, and no one who had opposed the Ulthrax had survived to tell the tale. Yet among the Coalition's forces, one species drew more attention than all the others. The humans. Kyle's first encounter with humans was at the Coalition's central command hub. They seemed ordinary, tall, with pale and sun-kissed skin, their limbs unremarkable compared to the multi-limbed or multi-eyed species Kale was used to. They walked among the other species with quiet confidence, speaking in soft voices that carried a strange energy. No prideful displays, no attempt to show superiority, no need to dominate. They simply existed, and yet the whispers among the council spoke of them with equal parts awe and fear. "They are weak," Kyle muttered under his breath, almost to himself. Yet the others, they speak as if they carry a storm in their hearts. Lieutenant Sarja, standing beside him, tilted her head. "That is the thing, Commander. Humans are unpredictable, and when humans are unpredictable, the Ulthrax hesitate. That hesitation can mean life or death." Kyle frowned. "Unpredictable? I have seen humans. I have seen them walk quietly. They seem fragile." Sarja's mouth curved into a slight smile. "Fragile does not mean powerless. They have a way of turning their fragility into strength. You will see soon enough." Kyle did not respond. Instead, he continued to watch the human crews move with purpose. Their ships were smaller than most, yet designed efficiently, almost elegantly. They had fewer weapons than some of the heavier species, but their engineers worked tirelessly, modifying and repairing their systems in ways Kale could not yet understand. Hours passed, and the Varen fleet moved closer to the Coalition's front line. The tension among the crews was thick. Kale could sense the fear in the younger officers, the unease in the pilots. They whispered about the Ulthrax, about reports of worlds erased in hours. And yet among all that fear, the humans stood calm. Not a single human officer shouted. Not a single human soldier panicked. They moved with methodical precision, their eyes fixed on the tasks ahead. Kyle could not help but notice a young human engineer, barely out of what Kyle assumed was their equivalent of adolescence, carrying an immense load of repair equipment up the narrow stairs to the engine deck. She paused only once, wiping sweat from her brow, then continued step by determined step. The Varen were capable of great endurance, but even Kale had to admire the human's persistence. A sudden alarm shook the flagship. Red lights flooded the observation deck as the communications officer rushed forward. "Commander, Coalition sensors detect Ulthrax activity near the Xyrath border. Multiple fleets advancing. They are moving faster than expected." Kale's 4 eyes narrowed. The Xyrath system was critical, a choke point in the Coalition's defense line. If the Ulthrax broke through here, the front line would collapse. The fleet would be cut in half before reinforcement could arrive. He turned to Sarja. "Prepare the fleet for immediate deployment. All species must be ready for engagement." Sarja nodded. "Yes, Commander. And the humans? They will follow orders like the others. Keep an eye on them, though. I want to see what they do in action," Kale said. Minutes later, the fleet jumped into the system, emerging near the outer planets. The Coalition had already established a defensive perimeter. Ships of all shapes and sizes waited, forming a fragile web against the approaching Ulthrax. Kale could see them now. Black ships with jagged designs, each bristling with weapons and radiating menace. They moved with precision, their numbers overwhelming, and yet the human ships did not shrink back. They took positions at the front line, smaller vessels maneuvering between the larger ships of the Varen, the Zathari, and other Coalition members. The humans did not display fear. They displayed focus, Kale could not look away. "Remarkable," he muttered. Zarya glanced at him, eyes reflecting a mixture of admiration and warning. "The Ulthrax underestimate them," she said softly, "and they always regret it." The hours passed in tense silence. The coalition ships were ready, but the Ulthrax forces were massive. Reports of previous skirmishes streamed into Kale's station. Worlds had fallen before the coalition could even respond. Casualties were inevitable. Kale felt a chill even as multiple heartbeats could not soothe. Then it happened. The Ulthrax fleet opened fire. Energy beams lanced across space, striking several coalition vessels. Explosions rocked the smaller ships, throwing debris into the vacuum. The front line shuddered under the attack, and yet the humans did not panic. Their ships darted between attacks, returning fire with precision. Smaller vessels worked together to disable key enemy targets, while larger ships provided cover. Engineers worked tirelessly, repairing damage even as explosions rocked the decks. Kale could see one human officer moving through a chaotic bridge, calming panicked crew members, redirecting damaged systems, and making adjustments to weapons. Each action was deliberate, each movement calculated. Kale felt a strange sensation he had not expected: awe. These humans, he realized, were not physically dominant. They did not have superior technology or overwhelming numbers. Yet they acted as if the very universe bent around their will. Hours became cycles. The battle raged, and coalition ships were destroyed, damaged, or forced to retreat. The Varan ships fell back in unison, retreating to preserve their strength. Yet the humans continued forward, engaging the enemy relentlessly. Kale watched one small human fighter, piloted by a single soldier, dodge multiple enemy strikes, then disable a massive Ulthrax weapon platform with a single well-placed strike. The Varan commander's mind raced. How could a species so seemingly fragile accomplish what they had? How could determination, focus, and a refusal to retreat become more powerful than superior numbers and firepower? As night fell on the planets below, Kale could see the humans assisting the wounded of every species. They did not prioritize their own. They did not hesitate to enter zones of danger to rescue others. The Varan, trained for centuries in diplomacy and combat, watched silently. Their respect grew with every action. Finally, Kyle turned to Zarya. "I thought I understood strength," he said quietly. "I was wrong. These humans, they fight with something different. Something I have not seen in any other species, and yet it is not anger. It is commitment. To others, to life itself." Zarya's eyes shone. "Commander, you are only seeing the beginning. The Ulthrax will test them further, and when they do, you will understand why the galaxy speaks of humans as they do." Kale nodded, though his mind was already filled with questions he could not yet answer. He looked again at the humans working tirelessly amidst chaos, standing undaunted, and felt a strange certainty. They were not like any other species. They were ordinary, and yet extraordinary. The battle was far from over. The Ulthrax were relentless. The Coalition's position was still precarious. But in the midst of fear, destruction, and uncertainty, one truth was clear: humans would not break. And that alone was enough to change everything the Varan had believed about power, courage, and the spirit of life itself. And so, the front line held, fragile but alive, led by those who seemed the least likely to command respect. Kale allowed himself a moment of silent reflection. The humans were unpredictable, yes, but in a way that the Varan and their allies had never faced before. Their endurance, their loyalty, their determination, it would leave a mark on everyone who witnessed it. In the distance, stars shone cold and indifferent, but for the first time in his long life, Commander Varan Kale felt a flicker of hope, because the humans were here, and they were not going anywhere. The Coalition fleet had barely begun to recover from the first wave of Ulthrax attacks when the alarm sounded again. This time, the red lights on the Elindra's observation deck flashed faster, pulsing like the heartbeat of a frightened animal. Commander Varan Kale's 4 eyes scanned the horizon, and his chest tightened. The Ulthrax were approaching in full force, faster than any intelligence report had predicted. "Commander," Lieutenant Zarya said, her voice steady but carrying an edge of tension. "They've split into 3 groups, one heading directly for the Zeroth system, another toward the outer colonies, and a third. It's almost a shadow fleet. No sensors can fully track them." Kale's thoughts raced. The Coalition had a plan, but the Ulthrax's speed and unpredictability were testing its limits. Entire planetary defenses could collapse before reinforcements even arrived. "Prepare the fleet," Kyle said, his voice calm but firm. "All species must hold their positions. This is the moment we see who can fight and who will fall." The Varan ships moved to form defensive lines, their shields activating, weapons powering up. Pilots adjusted their courses. Engineers double-checked every system. The tension was almost tangible, a living thing that pressed against every chest in the room. And yet the human ships moved forward without hesitation. They were smaller, fewer in number, and yet they did not retreat. Humans were weaving through the massive coalition vessels with surprising agility, coordinating like a single organism. Kale could not help but notice the quiet authority of their officers. No shouting, no desperation, only focus. "Look at them," Sarja whispered. "Every human knows their role, and yet they act like they can do anything." Kale nodded, unable to take his eyes off a squad of human engineers repairing a damaged frigate while enemy fire streaked past them. Sparks flew from the hull, but the humans did not falter. They carried tools, recalibrated systems, and directed power to critical points. One small figure, a young human officer with a visor reflecting the stars, moved from console to console giving quiet instructions. And the damaged ship came back online, ready to join the fight again. The first Ulthrax assault hit harder than anyone expected. Energy beams tore across the coalition line, striking ships with deadly precision. Explosions lit up the dark void, debris floating like deadly stars around the surviving vessels. The coalition pilots tried to respond, but the sheer numbers of the enemy were overwhelming. And then the humans did something that shocked the Varan. Instead of retreating, they divided into smaller, faster squads darting between Ulthrax fire. They focused on weak points, shield generators, weapon platforms, and enemy command ships. Every move was coordinated, almost invisible in its efficiency. A single human fighter would approach an Ulthrax warship, launch a precision strike, and retreat before the enemy could respond. Kyle's jaw tightened. "How?" he muttered. His mind struggled to reconcile what he was seeing. Humans were physically weaker, with fewer defenses, and yet they moved like the very storm of strategy itself. Sarja placed a hand on his shoulder. "It is not strength alone, Commander. It is determination. Humans fight not just to survive. They fight to protect, to save, to make sure others live." Kyle watched as one human officer leapt from a shuttle into the debris-filled void, tethered only by a magnetic cord. With careful movements, she reached a wounded Zithari pilot floating near the remnants of a destroyed ship. Her hands worked quickly, securing the pilot and guiding him back to her shuttle. The Varan pilot looked at her in disbelief, unable to comprehend why anyone would risk themselves in the middle of such chaos. They don't care for their own safety?" Kyle asked, astonished. "They care," Sarja replied, her eyes following another human maneuvering through enemy fire. "But they care more for everyone else. That is what makes them unpredictable, and that is what makes them dangerous." The Ulthrax for the first time began to hesitate. Their attacks became less coordinated, almost cautious. The humans were not just defending. They were actively turning the battlefield into a trap. They anticipated enemy movements, cutting off reinforcements, isolating ships, and drawing Ulthrax vessels into ambushes set by coalition forces. Kyle had never witnessed anything like it. Entire fleets had fallen before the Ulthrax, yet here the humans were ordinary in appearance, performing extraordinary feats. They were not leaders in the traditional sense. They did not scream orders or dominate the others. They simply acted with absolute clarity and purpose, and the rest of the coalition followed their example. Hours passed, and the battle intensified. The Ulthrax unleashed waves of attack, targeting weak points, aiming to break morale. Explosions shook the coalition ships. Pilots screamed over the comms, some panicked, others resigned. And yet the humans moved through it all with quiet resolve. They patched shields, repaired engines, and guided damaged ships to safety. They treated not only their wounded but anyone in need, regardless of species. Kyle felt a mixture of awe and unease. These humans were changing the battle without needing superior numbers or technology. They were rewriting the rules of engagement simply through courage, intellect, and relentless focus. Then, something unexpected happened. One human squadron, led by a middle-ranking officer Kale later learned was named Commander Elias, launched a counterstrike that stunned everyone. They bypassed the main Ulthrax forces, navigating through debris and enemy fire with surgical precision, and struck directly at the enemy's supply and communication ships. The Ulthrax fleet staggered as if it had been punched in the chest. "Impossible," Kale whispered. "A smaller fleet. They should have been destroyed." Sarya shook her head. "They are not just smaller, Commander. They are humans," the Varen observed, unable to look away. One by one, Coalition officers noticed the humans' actions. Fear and hesitation melted into admiration. Other species began coordinating with the humans' movements, realizing that what the humans were doing was working. The tide of the battle began to shift, just enough to prevent the Coalition's front line from collapsing entirely. Still, the cost was high. Ships of every species were destroyed, and the human squadron had taken damage too. But the humans did not retreat. They regrouped, repaired, and prepared for the next wave of attacks. Where other species might have panicked, they adapted. Where others hesitated, they moved with quiet determination. Kale could not comprehend how a species so ordinary had such extraordinary resilience. He thought back to what Sarya had said. Humans fight not out of pride, not out of anger, but out of commitment. Commitment to life, commitment to each other, commitment to the principle that leaving someone behind was never an option. By the time the first Ulthrax fleet withdrew to regroup, Kale had made a silent decision. Humans were unlike any other species he had known. Their courage, their endurance, and their strategic thinking were something beyond measurement. He turned to Sarya. "Prepare a report for the Council. The humans, they are not just allies. They are something else, something we have never faced." Sarya nodded. "Yes, Commander. And when the Ulthrax return, and they will, human determination will be what stops the Coalition from falling entirely." As night fell across the planets of the front line, the surviving ships drifted among the stars, battered but not broken. Humans moved through the fleet, helping wherever they could. They repaired engines, treated the wounded, and offered guidance to those who were shaken. They celebrated quietly, not with grand gestures, but with subtle smiles and nods. Kyle, standing on the Elindra's deck, allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The battle had been harsh, the losses devastating, but he had witnessed something he could not ignore. Humans were unpredictable, yes, but their unpredictability was not chaos. It was a force, a strategy, a spirit that could not be calculated or defeated through traditional means. For the first time in his long life, Commander Varen Kale understood that strength was not always measured by numbers, technology, or physical power. Sometimes it was measured by will, by courage, by the refusal to leave anyone behind. And in that moment, Kale knew something the Ulthrax would soon learn. No amount of firepower, no strategy, no terror could ever truly break the humans. Not when they fought not just for themselves, but for everyone else. The breaking front line had held against all odds, not because of machines, not because of numbers, but because of the humans. And Kale, watching them quietly at work, understood that the galaxy would never see humanity in the same way again. The Coalition fleet had barely caught its breath when the Ulthrax launched their largest offensive yet. Ships the size of moons moved like dark predators, their weapons glowing with lethal energy. The very space around them seemed to shudder as the fleet approached the front line. Every species in the Coalition felt the weight of impending doom. Commander Varen Kale stood on the Elindra's observation deck, eyes narrowing. His crew braced for what seemed like an impossible fight. Reports poured in. Entire sectors were being destroyed before Coalition forces could even respond. The Ulthrax had learned from the previous skirmishes. They were faster, more coordinated, and more ruthless. "Commander," Lieutenant Sarya said, her voice tense but controlled, "they are focusing on the Zirath choke point. If they break it, we lose the outer colonies. And then—" Her voice trailed off. Kale did not finish the thought. He had already seen what the humans could do in desperate situations. Even when the odds seemed impossible, they had adapted, fought, and held the line. He hoped it would be enough again. The humans did not panic. Their ships moved forward with calm precision, smaller squadrons weaving between larger Coalition vessels. Engineers worked tirelessly, recalibrating damaged systems while under fire. Medics prepared emergency treatments, ready for any casualties. Officers coordinated maneuvers quietly but efficiently. No hesitation, no fear, only action. Kale watched a human fighter pilot, barely an adult in human terms, dart toward a massive Ulthrax dreadnought. The ship's massive cannons were aimed directly at coalition vessels, ready to obliterate them. But the human fighter moved like a shadow, avoiding the fire with precise, calculated movements. The pilot fired a series of plasma torpedoes at critical weak points on the dreadnought. Each shot found its mark, causing explosions that rocked the massive ship. The Varen could hardly believe their eyes. One human fighter alone had damaged a vessel that would normally require dozens of ships to even scratch. Remarkable, Kale muttered. How do they do it? Sarya's gaze followed another human officer, this one coordinating squads across multiple ships. It is not just skill, Commander. It is strategy, foresight, and trust. Humans act as one, yet each one thinks independently. They anticipate the enemy, and they adapt instantly. The Ulthrax, realizing that their usual tactics were failing, unleashed a new wave of attacks. Their numbers seemed endless, their weapon fire relentless. Entire coalition sectors were engulfed in energy blasts and explosions. Ships were torn apart, debris drifting like deadly meteor fields. The soundless void carried only chaos and destruction, yet the humans remained unbroken. They split into smaller, faster squads, drawing enemy fire away from weaker vessels. They used terrain, the debris of destroyed ships, asteroid belts, and even planetary rings to hide, ambush, and strike with precision. They did not rush recklessly. Every movement was calculated, almost like a dance choreographed across the battlefield. Kale's mind raced. They are doing what no other species could even attempt. They are turning the battlefield itself into a weapon. Sarya nodded. Humans do not rely solely on technology or numbers. They rely on creativity, adaptability, and the willingness to face danger to protect others. Kale's attention shifted to the human engineers on the Alindra. Even under the pressure of incoming attacks, they worked tirelessly. Damaged systems were repaired with astonishing speed. Shields were reinforced, engines recalibrated, and weapons restored to full power. One young human engineer, sweat pouring down his face, moved between stations with incredible endurance, adjusting power flows, rerouting circuits, and patching breaches. The Varen could not comprehend the level of focus and endurance displayed by these humans. While other species had limits, humans seemed to operate beyond theirs. Their determination was contagious. Coalition forces, inspired by human courage, moved with renewed energy. Ships that were retreating regrouped, coordinated, and followed human-led maneuvers. Then the humans revealed their most daring strategy. They had prepared an underground tunnel network, hidden within the debris field of destroyed ships and space stations. Smaller squadrons used this network to approach the Ulthrax fleet from unexpected angles. Energy shields on the enemy vessels were bypassed, weapon systems disrupted, and supply lines cut off. The Ulthrax for the first time seemed vulnerable. Kyle watched in awe as one human officer led a small team directly into the heart of the enemy formation. They moved silently, avoiding detection, and struck at critical command ships. Explosions rippled through the Ulthrax fleet, throwing their coordinated assault into disarray. The coalition fleet, following the humans' lead, moved in to exploit the chaos. Unbelievable, Kyle whispered. A handful of humans are changing the course of the battle. Sarya smiled faintly. This is why they are feared and admired, Commander. The Ulthrax never expected a species to fight like this. They underestimate humans at their own peril. The Ulthrax regrouped, but their attacks were less coordinated, more hesitant. They could not predict the humans' movements. Every maneuver seemed countered before it even happened. The humans anticipated, adapted, and acted with relentless precision. Kale's attention shifted to the medics. Humans moved among wounded crew members of every species. They treated injuries with care and urgency, regardless of whether the patient was Varen, Zathari, or otherwise. One human nurse lifted a collapsed Zathari soldier onto a makeshift stretcher, carrying him across an open deck while dodging incoming fire. The Varen officers watched in stunned silence. Other species might have hesitated, but humans acted without thought for themselves, focused only on saving others. Hours passed, and the coalition began to gain a slight advantage. Ships that had been on the brink of destruction were repaired and rearmed. The Ulthrax, frustrated and confused, began retreating in small waves, testing the coalition's defenses only to find humans intercepting them at every turn. Cal realized something that shook him deeply. The humans were not simply fighting. They were teaching the coalition how to fight. Their courage, ingenuity, and selflessness inspired every other species to act beyond their normal limits. Where once there had been fear, Now there was determination. By the end of the cycle, the Ulthrax had been forced to withdraw from the front line. The Coalition had survived a battle that should have been impossible. Ships were damaged, crews were exhausted, but the line held, and at the center of it all were the humans, quiet, resolute, and unbroken. Kyle turned to Sarja. They did not just survive. They turned the tide of battle. Sarja nodded. And yet, Commander, the Ulthrax will return. They will not forget this lesson, but next time the humans will be ready. Kale could only nod, his mind still processing the enormity of what he had witnessed. Humans were not the strongest nor the most advanced. They were not the most numerous. Yet they had accomplished what countless species had failed to do. They had faced overwhelming odds, and through courage, creativity, and unity, they had not only survived, they had triumphed. For the first time, Commander Varen Kale understood why the galaxy spoke of humans with a mixture of fear, respect, and awe. Their strength was not in their weapons or their ships. It was in their spirit, in their refusal to surrender, in their determination to fight not just for themselves, but for everyone around them. As the stars shimmered over the battlefield, Kale realized something profound. The Ulthrax had been stopped not by superior technology or numbers, but by humans, ordinary beings whose courage and will had made them extraordinary. And he knew, without a doubt, that the next time the Ulthrax came, humanity would not just stand, they would fight and they would win no matter the cost. The battle had raged for cycles without pause. Energy beams scorched the void, tearing apart Coalition vessels, and the Ulthrax forces pressed forward relentlessly. Even the most hardened pilots and officers were exhausted. Ships creaked under strain, shields flickered, and alarms blared endlessly, but through it all, the humans moved steadily, quietly, and without fear. Commander Varen Kale stood on the Alindra's observation deck, watching the chaos unfold. His heart, or what he called his cogitative core, pounded in a rhythm of tension and awe. The Ulthrax had expected the Coalition to falter. They had calculated, predicted, and assumed that fear would spread, that morale would collapse. But they had not accounted for humans. Lieutenant Sarja leaned over the rail beside him. "They don't panic," she said softly. "Not once. Even when we lose ships, even when the battlefield is falling apart, they move forward. Always forward." Kale watched as a squadron of human fighters approached a massive Ulthrax command ship. It was heavily shielded and bristling with weapons, far larger and more dangerous than any human ship. Yet the humans did not hesitate. They navigated debris and incoming fire with astonishing precision, coordinating with other Coalition vessels to isolate the target. One human pilot, barely 20 cycles old, executed a daring maneuver, weaving through enemy fire and striking a vulnerable power core. The explosion rocked the command ship, sending it spinning into a debris field. The Ulthrax fleet faltered, thrown into confusion. Kale could hardly breathe. How can a single species do this?" he muttered. Sarja smiled, though her eyes reflected exhaustion. "They fight not for glory," she said. "They fight for everyone else. That is something no one else does." The Ulthrax realized too late that the humans were unlike any other species. They did not rely on brute strength, superior numbers, or advanced technology. Instead, they used ingenuity, coordination, and an unbreakable will. Every move was calculated, every action purposeful. The humans did not just counter the enemy, they anticipated them, turning the battlefield itself into a weapon. In the midst of this chaos, Kale observed another remarkable sight. Human medics moved across open decks, tending to the wounded of every species. They ignored their own safety, reaching through fire and debris to save those who could not save themselves. One young medic carried a collapsing Zethari soldier across a fractured deck, guiding him to the Alindra's medical bay. Kale's own species would have hesitated, weighing risk against reward. The humans did not. "They are selfless," Kale said, awe in his voice. "It is not enough to survive, they must ensure everyone else survives too." Sarja nodded. "And that is why the Ulthrax are beginning to retreat. They cannot comprehend it. They are used to fear, chaos, and surrender. Humans do not surrender. Indeed, the Ulthrax began to pull back. Their attacks grew hesitant, disorganized. The Coalition fleet seized the moment. Inspired by the humans' courage and strategy, ships that had been battered and nearly destroyed rallied. Coordinated counterattacks pushed the Ulthrax further from the front line. Kyle watched as humans led squads into the heart of enemy formations, striking at critical points, supply ships, shield generators, weapon arrays, then retreating just as quickly. It was almost artistic in its execution, a deadly ballet across the stars. Every strike left the Ulthrax more disoriented, more frustrated, more vulnerable. Then came the pivotal moment. The Ulthrax command fleet, realizing that the humans could not be broken, gave a signal to withdraw. Massive ships turned, engines flaring as they escaped through the void, leaving behind the battlefield they had expected to conquer. Kyle felt a mix of relief and disbelief. The humans had not only survived, they had forced the enemy to flee. Entire sections of the Coalition fleet, battered and exhausted, now held the line thanks to the humans' courage, ingenuity, and determination. Yet the humans did not celebrate. They did not shout or boast. Instead, they moved quietly among the survivors, assisting the wounded, repairing damaged ships, and calming panicked crew members. Where others might have paused to revel in victory, the humans focused on what came next. Kyle turned to Saria. "They don't even seem happy," he said. Saria shook her head. "They know the battle is not over. Victory is not about pride or glory. It is about survival, about helping others, about ensuring that life continues." Kyle reflected on what he had seen. In the past cycles, he had watched countless species retreat or collapse under pressure. He had expected fear, panic, even desperation. Yet humans had done the opposite. They had turned fear into action, weakness into strength, and chaos into opportunity. He remembered a moment earlier in the battle. A young human officer had lifted a damaged Coalition vessel out of harm's way. Despite incoming fire, despite the obvious danger, another had coordinated a series of attacks that neutralized an entire Ulthrax squadron. Others had patched shields and repaired engines faster than Kale had thought possible. Every human had acted with purpose, without hesitation, without thought for themselves, and that, he realized, was the true source of their power. Not weapons, not numbers, not technology, will, spirit, commitment. For the first time in his long life, Kale understood something profound. The Ulthrax had fled not because of overwhelming firepower or superior tactics, but because they faced humans. Ordinary, fragile-looking creatures who refused to back down, who refused to surrender, who refused to leave anyone behind. The Coalition ships began moving through the aftermath of the battle, assessing damage and rescuing survivors. Humans were everywhere, assisting, repairing, guiding. They spoke quietly, gave orders softly, and led without demanding attention. Other species followed their lead, inspired not by fear but by admiration. Kyle watched as a young human officer coordinated a salvage operation, directing damaged Coalition ships away from unstable debris fields. Another group moved to assist Ulthrax prisoners, tending to them without hesitation. Kale's species would have never considered such actions in the middle of battle, yet humans acted as if it were instinct. "They are more than we imagined," Kale whispered. "The Ulthrax fled from something they could not understand. They fled from human spirit itself." Saria nodded. "And that is why the galaxy speaks of humans with a mixture of fear and respect. It is not just that they fight well, it is that they fight for something greater than themselves." The stars above the battlefield were silent, indifferent to the chaos below. But among the Coalition fleet there was a sense of awe. The humans, battered and exhausted, moved among their allies with quiet determination. They were ordinary, yes, but their actions had been extraordinary. They had changed the course of the battle, saved countless lives, and forced the enemy to retreat. Kyle felt a flicker of hope, something he had not felt in cycles. Perhaps the humans were not just fighters. They were a force of inspiration. Where fear had once spread, now courage took root. Where despair had once lingered, now determination burned. The Coalition fleet gathered, tending to the wounded, assessing damage, and preparing for what would come next. The humans, still at the center of the fleet, moved quietly, always forward, always focused, always ready. Kyle knew one thing with certainty: the Ulthrax would return. But when they did, they would face a species unlike any they had ever encountered, a species that refused to break, refused to retreat, and refused to leave anyone behind. And the galaxy would never see humans the same way again. The battlefield was quiet now. The stars stretched endlessly over the damaged Coalition fleet, where fires smoldered in the remains of ships and the vacuum of space carried the stillness of a hard-won moment. The Ulthrax had fled, retreating into the darkness from which they came. They had been beaten not by overwhelming firepower, but by the courage, ingenuity, and indomitable spirit of the humans. Commander Varen Kale walked slowly along the Elindra's observation deck, watching the human crews move among the fleet. Some repaired ships, others assisted the injured, and some quietly coordinated supply lines. Despite exhaustion, they worked tirelessly, without complaint, without need for recognition. The humans did not celebrate their victory. They simply prepared for what came next. Lieutenant Saria joined Kale at the railing. "They are remarkable," she said softly, her eyes following a group of humans guiding a damaged Varen vessel to safety. "They do not fight for glory, Commander. They fight for everyone, and that is why the Ulthrax fled." Kyle's mind replayed the battle in fragments, the young human pilot weaving through enemy fire, the engineers repairing ships under bombardment, the medics saving lives while ignoring their own safety. Every moment had been a testament to a kind of strength the Varen had never seen before. It was not physical strength nor technological superiority. It was spirit. They were not just fighters, Kale said. They were something else. Something the Ulthrax could not understand, and something we cannot ignore. Saria nodded. Humans inspire others to rise above fear. They remind everyone what courage and loyalty really mean. Across the fleet, humans worked quietly but with relentless efficiency. One small group had organized a repair squad, patching shields and engines on battered coalition ships. Another group assisted injured soldiers, calming panic and fear with gentle words and steady hands. A young human officer stood on the deck of the Elindra, giving instructions calmly, yet with authority that carried across species. Kale watched them closely. In his long life, he had seen many species face impossible odds. Some had collapsed, others had fought with fury, but he had never seen anything like this. Humans did not fight out of anger, nor out of pride, nor even fear. They fought because they believed in something greater than themselves. They fought because they refused to let others fall. The Coalition Council had called for an emergency assembly after the Ulthrax retreat. Leaders of every species gathered in the central command hub. The Varen, the Zathari, the Trelk, and others spoke in hushed tones about the human contribution. All of them acknowledged the same truth. Without the humans, the Coalition would have fallen. Entire systems might have been lost. When the humans entered the hall, there was no fanfare. They did not boast. They did not demand attention. They simply stood quietly, listening as other leaders praised their efforts. And yet their calm presence commanded respect. Kyle observed the reactions of his fellow leaders. Eyes widened. Voices faltered. Even the most experienced officers struggled to find words that could describe what the humans had accomplished. "They are extraordinary," said one Trelk general, his multi-limbed form trembling slightly. "I have never seen such courage, such dedication, such humanity." The word, Kale realized, carried more weight than anyone could imagine. Humanity, the name of the species, had become a symbol of something beyond fear or admiration. It was a symbol of hope, of courage, of relentless spirit. After the meeting, Kale returned to the Elindra's observation deck. He watched the humans move among the fleet, assisting, repairing, guiding. He felt a sense of awe he had never experienced. The Ulthrax had fled not from weapons, not from numbers, not from strategy, but from the human spirit itself. One human officer approached Kale quietly. "Commander," she said, her voice calm but steady, "we must prepare for the next attack. The Ulthrax may return. We cannot assume they will not try again." Kale nodded. "I know. But tell me, officer, how do you endure so much and keep moving forward? How do you continue to fight when everything seems lost?" The human smiled faintly. "We do not think about losing. We think about those who need us. Those who cannot protect themselves. That is all that matters. Fear is a choice. Courage is action." Kyle stared at her, silent. He had always known courage, but he had never seen it expressed like this. Not in a species so seemingly ordinary, yet so extraordinary. In the following cycles, the Coalition worked tirelessly to repair and reorganize. Humans were everywhere, offering guidance, encouragement, and assistance. They helped train Coalition forces, showing them new strategies, new ways to coordinate, new ways to survive against an enemy that relied on fear and chaos. Every species learned from them, inspired by their example. Kyle could not help but reflect on what had happened. The Ulthrax had been stopped not by the might of the Coalition, but by humans leading by example. Their endurance, selflessness, and intelligence had changed the course of history. Entire species now looked to humans not only as allies but as symbols of hope and resilience. And yet Kale realized something deeper. The humans themselves seemed unaware of the full extent of their impact. They moved quietly, without pride, without arrogance, helping others simply because it was right. Their spirit was not motivated by recognition or reward. It was motivated by something far greater. The belief that no one should be left behind and that hope must never die. The Varan commander understood then why the galaxy feared and respected humans. They were unpredictable, yes, but not in a chaotic way. Their unpredictability came from a refusal to conform to the expectations of fear and weakness. They could not be measured or controlled, because their strength was rooted in something beyond calculation, a spirit that inspired others, demanded courage, and refused to accept defeat. Kale turned to Sarja. I always thought we were the experienced ones. We have fought for centuries, seen countless battles. But the humans, they have shown us something different, something we cannot unsee. Sarja nodded. We have seen the future of courage, Commander. It walks among us quietly, steadily, and without fear. The Ulthrax will never be the same, and neither will we. As the Coalition fleet moved to regroup and strengthen their defenses, Kale walked among the human crews. He saw exhaustion etched into their faces, but also determination. They spoke quietly to each other, checking on injured allies, repairing damaged systems, preparing for the possibility of another attack. Every action was deliberate, precise, and selfless. Kyle realized with a quiet awe that the humans had not only fought the Ulthrax, they had changed the hearts and minds of every species that witnessed them. Even those who had feared humans before now looked upon them with a mixture of admiration, respect, and yes, a little awe. The Varan, the Council, and the Coalition fleets all came to the same conclusion. The humans were unlike anything the galaxy had known. They were ordinary, fragile-looking, and yet extraordinary in every way that mattered. They fought not for power, not for conquest, not for recognition. They fought for life, for hope, for the principle that no one should ever be left behind. Kale's 4 eyes scanned the human crews one last time. They were still working, still moving quietly through the fleet, still inspiring courage wherever they went. He felt a profound certainty in his mind. The Ulthrax had fled, yes, but the real victory had been something greater. The humans had taught the galaxy what true courage looked like, and the Varan, along with every other species in the Coalition, could never see them the same again, Kale whispered to himself, the words almost lost in the quiet hum of the fleet. The enemy fled. But even we could not look at the humans the same again. The stars above the battlefield remained cold and indifferent. Yet among the Coalition fleet a new light burned, the light of human courage, resilience, and spirit, shining brighter than any weapon or star. And for the first time, the galaxy understood that true strength did not always come from might, numbers, or technology. It came from heart, will, and the refusal to leave anyone behind. The humans continued their work, uncelebrated, unbowed, and unstoppable. And the galaxy would never forget the day the Ulthrax fled. Not from fear, not from force, but from something far stronger, the human spirit.